Welcome to the Something to Think About podcast, where we take a closer look at what the Bible says about common questions. I am Andre Palmer. The scriptures now explain that choices are broken down into the following categories: the size or the height of the expectation, according to Deuteronomy 1:28, the strength required to get it done, the equipment or the resources that you need, and the skills that you need. So these are how it's broken down. So we're talking about, if you're thinking about this from a project perspective, this can start to make sense very quickly. But if you're thinking about now dealing with a relational issue, now we're talking about the magnitude of the decision, how the impact of the decision or the situation it may cause. What exactly do you need in order to move on from the circumstance or the issue? Could be a relational one. So the issue may be weighing heavily on you. It may have a negative impact on your life overall. But in order for you to move on, it's going to take a great deal of work to get the pieces of the puzzle together. So for instance, you've been in a relationship for many years and it don't work out, and you have to rebuild your life from scratch because of this issue. Now we have to think about now, if you look on the size of the job to rebuild, it's going to seem bigger than what you can manage. Then you're looking on in terms of the strength that you're going to need in order to get it done. Now you're going to compare to the strength you currently have to what you need in order to really move on. Now you're going to see that there may be a gap there that you have to think about in terms of how you're going to get it done. Then the infrastructure, the equipment required, from a relational perspective is in terms of what would you need in order to get these things done. And then the human resources is basically the support, the human support that you will have around you to provide the help in that transition period. So if you're thinking about it from a project perspective, she's talking about equipment and so on. But from a relational perspective, no, you're thinking about looking on the size of the decision, you're looking on the strength that you will need, the inner strength that you would need. The infrastructure is basically the information that you would need in order to move on, and also the emotional support, physical people now around you, helping you to navigate and moving forward. So these are the categories in terms of how the choices are broken down. These are the type of decisions that you will have to make in terms of moving forward. So it really boils down to the resources that you need: the strength, the capacity, and height. How large the decision is, how tall. It's a tall order, it's a big decision. It may take a lot of resources in order to get this done. But these are the three things that we have to look at when it comes on to the comparison. So we're moving now closer in terms of to the comparison of the decision itself. And we can begin to see now how these things can have an impact on us. To give you an example, there were some lepers that was outside of the city gates, and they had a decision to make. They were very hungry, but they were also very sick. They said that if we stay here, we're going to die. If we go into the city, we're going to die. But either way, food is in the city. Where we are, there's no food. So they decided that they were going to walk towards the city to see if they could get some food. But while they were walking towards the city, there was a war happening at the time. The enemies of Israel was camped out close to where they were. When they were walking, these men were just walking casually towards where the city was. And they heard, the enemy camp heard like chariots of horses walking towards them. These were regular men. They had leprosy. It was just a group of them walking towards the city looking for food. And when the enemy heard them coming, they did not hear the footstep of a group of men. They heard chariots, an army approaching them. By the time these men reached to where these people were and approached the enemy's camp, everybody was dead. because they were in utter confusion. War broke out among them, and they literally either fled the scene or they died. And they were able now to get some food, and then they ran into the city, called the elders and so on, and they came and they got the spoils and the plunder of war. So we're looking on the fact that they didn't have no resources any at all, but they were walking towards the city by faith that food will be there and they will be able to get something to replenish themselves, and then they'll figure it out from there. So, but when you think about the outcome itself, it was way different than what they expected. So, because they didn't expect that they would find an empty camp and they could eat all they want with all the resources left behind and so on. So this is where we're thinking about in terms of when you're looking and making comparison, you're comparing your strength, your capacity, and how big or small the situation is. And this now determine how well you move forward in terms of the decision. It impacts the decision that you're going to make. Some decisions you're not even sure whether or not you have all the resources, but really and truly, when you're looking at the right perspective, where your limitation starts, that's stops, that's where God begins to work things out. And this is something I've said over and over again several times. But this is something that we can think about when it comes down to that. So there are three perspectives that drive decision making and our behavior as believers. First one, small in comparison, we are less than capable to win. This was the perspective that Israel had in the book of Numbers where we started. Equal in comparison, meaning our chances of achieving the outcome is 50-50. Larger in comparison, we are more than capable um, enough to win. So these are the three perspectives that would help to drive our decisions in our situation. The small in comparison, you know that you don't have the resources to function. Whether it is that the inner strength, whether it is the money, or both. Sometimes we don't even have enough help in terms of people, and we're sure and confident that things are not going to work out as we expected. We don't have all the things in place to get things done. Equal in comparison, we have some of the resources and the chances of things working out is 50-50. While larger in comparison is putting yourself, you know within yourself that things can work out for the better. But we want to ensure that we put ourselves in the perspective that we trust God at all times. Whether the situation you're more confident, you're not so the chances is 50-50, or you don't have you're not as confident as you expect. But really and truly, in all of these situations, when you're comparing, is really to put yourself in a position where you trust God no matter what the outcome may be. Because you want to ensure that you're looking at it from a perspective of faith and not fear. Because when you think about that, you don't have the resources to function and things don't look like it's going to work out, but God says it will. Now you're putting yourself in a position where confusion may be in the mix because you're not certain as to how things are going to work out. But this is the foundation where we want to move forward in terms of how are we comparing the situation. And if you think about in terms of when you think about comparison, Jesus talked about if you're going to build a tower, we must first sit down and see if we have all the resources we need to complete the project itself. And he gave two examples. He gave the one about building the tower, and he gave the one about the army in Luke 14 from about verse 28 down. And he said the man with the less resources, the king with the less army, would go and negotiate with the king for terms of peace. While in terms of building the tower, if you don't have enough resources, you have a decision to make as to whether or not you want to go ahead and do these things with less resources because you would put yourself in a position of not being able to finish. So these are some decisions that we have to think about when it comes out to when we are looking at making to making plans and so on. Each perspective have its own competitive advantage that will enable a person to find a unique angle to overcome difficulty. So if you're small in comparison, where where is an overlooked area that you can find an opportunity? That's a question I can think about. How can I use the limited resources to narrow my focus? What are the weaknesses in this situation that I can exploit? And how can I narrow my focus and still make a big impact? So this can be either at work, this can be whether it be in ministry at church and so on. These are some things that we can think about, even in our own personal life, how we can find opportunities to narrow our focus, where we can find a different angle that we have not looked at that can help us to shift our focus in a different area, um, where we can even help us to move forward. So, for example, if it's a health crisis and the treatment plan that is being suggested is way expensive than what you can manage, but there's an alternative. You can probably ask the doctor, is there alternative treatments that we can think about that are still that can still help us to to achieve the outcome? These are some questions that you can ask. If you think about even from a relational perspective, where can I narrow my focus to shift to shift my attention away from the difficulty that I'm facing at the moment, where I can find an opportunity to move on or to find a result. Where is the opportunity that we can find a middle ground? So these are some questions when you think about small in comparison. This is when the resources are limited, very limited. Equal in comparison, there's a 50-50 chance that things might work out, it may not, but you still don't have more than enough to function. How can I differentiate and stand out? This is a more of a business question, or a job question. Where can I put where should I put my resources? So this is now you're asking yourself the question, what is the best use of what you have, as opposed to um trying to find a way to narrow your focus. Now the decision is to where can I put my efforts and my time or my resources that can give the best outcome. Where is the opportunity that can make an impact? And are there any weaknesses that are being overlooked? So some of these questions are business questions, some of these questions are job related questions, or we can actually use some of these things on the job, even at home, and even in a relationship. Where can you spend most of your time that you have an opportunity to have a greater impact in your relationship with your children or your other loved one or family members? Um, and what can you do differently to stand out? I mean, sometimes you're in the it's from a bit like to think about from a work perspective, everybody doing the same thing. But where can you find an opportunity to do something different? So that's some questions to think about, where that is concerned. And the last slide here is the larger in comparison. And what is a strategy that will enable you to win? So if you have more than enough resources, now you need to be strategic about how you use it. Where is the opportunity to take advantage that and before anybody else? How much resources is needed to get this done? So you're not necessarily thinking about whether or not you have enough. You just need it enough to figure out now how much you would need to do. Are there any weaknesses that you should to protect yourself against? So now having more means that you can be exploited, and you have to think about these things as well. Um, so lastly, there are some threats that you need to think about, some risks that will affect your perspective. Seeing your size as a disadvantage, seeing your capacity as a disadvantage, seeing your size as an advantage and becoming overconfident, seeing your capacity as an advantage and being complacent, seeing your strength as not being able to deliver what is required, having difficulty differentiating yourself from others, overlooking opportunities, and giving up because of limitations. So these are some things to think about, that can affect the perspective. These are some things that we can meditate on as we go through the rest of the week, the rest of the month, navigating the season that we're in at the moment. and helping us to have a stronger perspective going forward.
And that's our show. Thanks for listening. I release a new episode of this podcast every Tuesday, wherever you listen to your podcast. If you find this information useful, please share this episode with a friend.